Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful evening of See and Learn 2019. Woo! We want to thank each and every one of you guys for joining us tonight at Long Haul Grill. Thank you guys for joining. And to those tuning in with us on Facebook, thank you for joining us. And we invite you to comment where you're watching from. And at the end, if you have any questions, just comment and we'll get your questions answered for you. With that being said, we do want to thank Carib Trans for sponsoring us and allowing us to be able to share these presentations with people all around the world. So thank you, Carib Trans. Woo! And a big thank you to Solera Dunya for hosting our expert and making him feel at home here on Saba. And a big thank you to Prince Bernhard Culture Funds and the government of Saba for their generous donations and kind support. Woo! And one more big thank you to all of our sponsors. Without them, this wouldn't be possible. So thank each and every one of you guys. And in case you guys didn't know, we have a raffle going on. It's only $2 per ticket, and with that ticket, you guys could be a lucky winner of some of these one of these glorious prizes. So these prizes we got going on, starting from the upper corner, we have 2 round-trip tickets on the Dawn 2 ferry going from St. Martin to Saba Island. We also have a wine gift basket from Shea Booba, a handcrafted knife by John C. Saba, 2-night stay at the Travel Inn, which is located on St. Martin Island. We have 3 prizes from Aquamania, a sunset sail for 2 around St. Martin Island, 2 round-trip tickets on the Edge Ferry going from St. Martin to Saba, and a tango dinner for cruise for 2 around St. Martin Island. Some really cool adventure stuff for you guys. We also have a beautiful piece of glass art made by Joe Bean. It'll be a mermaid and a seahorse. And last but, oh, no, we got 2 more. Getting ahead of myself. So we have a 2-for-1 certificate, 8 days, 7 nights aboard the Caribbean Explorer 2 for our divers out there. That goes from St. Martin to Saba Island and then to St. Kitts. So really cool adventure. We also have a 2-night stay at Queen's Gardens Resort and Spa. So you guys can be staying there for free for 2 nights. All for $2. So if you guys want to enter that raffle, we have our tickets here for you guys, and we can get you in. We'll be drawing those on our closing night, October 27th, and you do not have to be present to win. So we'll give you a call or an email, whatever you leave us, and then we'll let you guys know you won one of those prizes. Whoopsies. All right, tomorrow, our expert is going to be leading a Fern ID hike. So if you guys want to join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. at the See and Learn tent right over here at Lambie's place, you get a free taxi over to the trail, or you can meet us at the trailhead. And next, we're switching things up tonight. So we're actually going to have Saba Local and one of Frank's trusty hiking guides, Peter Johnson, give an introduction to Frank. So please welcome Peter Johnson.
Thank you, Tiffany. Good evening, everyone. So for those of you that don't know, I teach at the high school, and it's not easy being a high schooler. A lot of pressure, and one of the many pressures for high schoolers is, you know, the societal pressure of knowing what you want to do with your life. And by age of 15, 16, 17, you're supposed to have it figured out. And I tell them the story of my good friend, Frank Axelrod, who didn't know what he was doing until the ripe age of 50. And lucky for us, he found his passion, which was plants and the field of botany. And we're so lucky to have him here tonight. My first hike with Frank and Jean, we did the Spring Bay Trail. And halfway down the trail, you know, scientists, when they see a plant they want, they go for it. And there was Jean holding on Frank to make sure he didn't fall off the side of the cliff, and grabbing him by the pants. So it was that was all the way back in 2013, and it's been a really great time since then, taking them on tours, going around Saba to do all of the hikes to help identify all of Saba's plant species. And the reason why I initially met up with Frank was through my brother. So my brother was writing a book, the Saba Dictionary, and and together we were trying to help attach Latin names to Saba plant names. And there's no better way to help preserve a plant name, or in terms of Saba's culture, than to apply the Latin name. Because once you have your Latin name with your Saba name, then you're golden. And you think a small place like Saba would be easy. There's not many plants, but there's no shortage of plant names on Saba. And in addition to that, we even have, based on the village that you're in, a different plant name. And a big part of the reason for that was Saba, historically, the villages are all very separate. And, what went on Wimmerside was the same thing that went on in Hell's Gate. An example of that would be my great-grandmother. Her name was Agnes. And she lived in Hell's Gate. And she never saw the bottom until she was the age of 52. And because you just didn't have time to go around. You had to fish, farm, cook, and sleep. And that was your day-to-day life. And she had to go to the bottom because she had to go to the Fort Bay to catch a ferry to St. Kitts because she had to go to the doctor. And if not for that, she might have not ever seen the bottom. So each village has its own cultural identity, and that can be seen in plant names. So I have a couple examples here. The one is what we in Wimmerside call the hog plum. But if you were from Hell's Gate, you would call it a pork plum. Or if you were from the bottom, you'd call it the Fatmore plum. And thanks to Frank, we know that the plant name for that is the Chrysobalanus icaco. Pardon my Latin. And another example is what we in Wimmerside call the blatty tree. In other islands in the region, they'll call it the loblolly tree. But in St. John's, you would call it the bolladdy tree. And in the bottom, it was called the mubladdy tree. And once again, thanks to Frank, we now know it's called the Pisonia subcordata. And so, Frank, thank you on behalf of my brother and I for helping us to preserve Saba's culture. And on that note, I would like to introduce our speaker this evening, Frank Axelrod.
Thank you, Keith. Okay. This talk was helped by my son and my wife. Took three of us. I am not unaccustomed as I am to using PowerPoint. They've helped it in three different ways, and I can only think of the old joke about Dutchmen at the time of the Reformed Church, the founding, about three Dutchmen. If you have one, you have a religion. If you have two, you have a schism, and if you have three, you have a heresy. So this is essentially what went on, and the product of this heresy will be this speech. Okay. First of all, I should say a little bit about my credentials. I became a botanist as a professional. He was wrong. I wasn't at 50. I was young 45 at the time. And I did so. I started from the ground up, mostly identifying plants and dealing with other people's work on it and correcting mistakes and what have you. And I had volunteered at a herbarium, and I kept this up. So finally I was hired as a technician, on and on up the ladder. So one day a book was published by someone in Puerto Rico. I work at the herbarium of the University of Puerto Rico biology department. And foolishly, I said to someone, I can do better than that. You should never do that. Never, never. And so I started working on the book. 10 years later, to the day, having looked at 100,000 specimens at different places in Puerto Rico, lots of information, having gone out in the field maybe 500 times for various reasons, I came up with a book, an inventory of Puerto Rican plants based on specimens only, things you could check out. And it came out in 2011. And I learned a lot of things along the way about how to make an inventory. And so when an inventory a possibility came up of doing the same on Statia, I jumped on it. Here was another island, it could be there. And that was much simpler and faster. It took me 5 years. And I collected, in Puerto Rico, I had collected maybe about 10,000 plants, of Puerto Rican plants. Statia, it was a mere somewhere over 1,000. And then when that was done, you get in the habit, son of Sam, and things like that. I said, I can do the same thing for Saba, and I always wanted to go to Saba. And here I am. Another 5 years later, it was 1915. Oh, it's only 4 years. I've speeded up the process. And I'm here before you to talk about what I've done. So that's basically my credentials and what I do. I will tell you now, I think, let me see. Ta-da. Oh, backwards. No, I have the right.
I added another slide, sorry.
Ah. Who?
There you go. Let's go.
That's the same thing. Here we go. First, I'm told to stimulate people from Saba, I should add the acknowledgments first so they know the connection. First of all, yeah, it's driving them crazy. But okay, he's not here. First of all, you've met Peter. So Peter is probably will be number one on the list. He's down lower, but we've elevated him. Then we have to go, who supported me? Botany does not cost very much money, but it does cost, like travel costs. And so that was taken care of by the Prince Bernard Culture Funds, the Caribbean branch. The Saba Conservation Foundation, and they gave me permits and a loan of James Crocodile Johnson, I think he's called. It was very good. He helped me in the beginning of finding places, showing me plants he didn't know, showing me plants that occurred very little in Saba. Then there was Peter, who actually took me around the trails and showed me where they were and what he thought would be of interest to me. It was very nice for someone who's completely ignorant of a place to get a lot of guiding from people here, and people in general were extremely cooperative. Anyone whose land I crossed was always very nice, and we had long conversations with many people, like Reed, I forget his last name. So we met a lot of people collecting, and many of you people, this is the last one, have noticed a very old couple, a guy with a white hat and a blue shirt walking along the road and things, and wondering, what are they doing here? Now you know. And occasionally people would give us rides too. And then, of course, you have to bring the family in. My wife is retired as a professor of anatomy and histology at the University of Puerto Rico Medical School. And what better follow-up than to be her husband's field assistant? And and she loved it. No pressure and what have you, just dealing with me. Then my son, Amitai, who loves mountains, he loved this mountain, he came along, and by that time I needed a little more care and feeding than usual, and he was, as I say, unusually intelligent, overqualified even as pack animals go. He was quite wide. I think that pretty well. I thank James Johnson. I think that pretty well covers everybody. Now we can get to the meat of the lecture. If I press the right button, boom, voila. Different area. You have to treat when it comes to writing up these matters. I like to have a geographical schema, and really it varies from island to island. In Puerto Rico, it was traditionally traditionally been done with municipios, cities. But sometimes they cross ecological boundaries, so I developed a scheme where you had a combination of ecological boundaries, national parks, other things. It was more complicated. It's a much bigger island, of course, 100 by 60 miles. St. Eustatius, or Statia, was slightly different. There you had definite ecological changes. You had the really dry side of the island in Boven, and then you had the quill, and then you had the flatlands in between. And I used a mixture of trails and areas like that. In Saba, pretty much I explored by trail. And so I did not deal with ecological areas because they're kind of obvious here. Below, I won't give you 200 or 100 meters, it can be extremely dry. from 300 to maybe 500 or 600. It gets mesic. It's kind of a cross between it. At about 600 to 800, you get the hydric areas where we get wet mountain forest, and above that you tend to have cloud forest. They call it here elfin forest, but it's not the elfin forest I know from Puerto Rico. And they also say that in Statia there's a cloud forest, and you don't have a cloud forest on the rim. It's just a wet mountain forest. In a true elfin forest, you would have trees with several layers of epiphytes, mosses, and what have you. The ground would be full with mosses and things like that. You don't really have that in the peak. But, that's just a matter of words. It's really what you have is quite elegant. So you pretty much know the kind of vegetation you have in Saba by where you are in there. So then we will get to the meat of the talk. Bye-bye. So I'll give you a physical background. I'll tell you what justifies having an inventory of the kind I do. I'm not of the same level of people like James Johnson, and I wish I'd met him, but I never have, as Tom Van Holt, who know their trees and vegetation very well, and they know where things are. I don't. I come in with my knowledge of many of the plants from Puerto Rico and Statia, and there's a good deal of overlap. But I can't go out and look at the bark and say, that's that. I don't have that kind of it's insight, which you get from being exposed to it day after day. I take specimens, I take them back to the herbarium, look at them, and then there I'm pretty good. Okay, how did I accomplish such an inventory, and what's the final product consist? And finally, I'll have the pictures. Everybody says for these talks, you have to have lots of pictures. So otherwise people will fall asleep on you. Okay. So this is the road guide. We'll get to this anyway. So, how did Saba get its vegetation? You pretty much will know this. Here you can read. These are the basic things. Could someone please? Normally don't be a fussy, but I can hear his conversation. It's throwing me off. And looking these up, these of course are nothing I originally know, but it's the northernmost volcano of the Antillean chain. It's a stratovolcano, which are the ones that go boom, with big lava flows, and they're the kind you had in Montserrat, where you have big waves. And we have flat places in between, such as the crater. These are not, you don't really have any craters here like the Quill, but you have flat areas between the many domes of this volcano. And eruptions that formed Saba started 500 years ago and then calmed down. You have the Illyrian Statia of Boven is also about 500,000 years old. St. Kitts is much older, and that will play a little role. The volcano is now considered dormant, like the one in Statia. There have been a couple of fumaroles found. They're still active, and who knows when these will become something different. And then we have to talk about the first plants arrived in Saba no more than 500,000 years ago. And I'll talk about that more when we get to native plants, because truly in a volcanic island there's no such thing as a native plant, okay? What you have is you draw an imaginary line and say everything after this it comes in after this is not native, and everything before is. And often it's done at the time of Columbus, because at least we start to have inklings of records, like in Puerto Rico, it said, and there was a great forest as I sailed past. So, in the northern coastal plains that have been completely destroyed for sugarcane, there was a forest there at the time. For records of plants, what was here, that comes much later in a place like St. Eustatius or Saba. But, so everything that's here had to come from somewhere else. And it can come by wind, it can come on seabirds, It can get washed up on shore and things like that. I think the good source for many of the plants is Cyclists. If you look at many, what I would call the indicators in the higher parts of the island, like mountain mahogany. For some of these I know the names, for some I don't. The other names I know are Latin, Marilla Racemosa. There were a couple of mellostones. They're also found in the upper mountain of St. Kitts, where I've never been there, so I don't know, but I can just read it. Okay. Next. The importance of the inventory of vegetation, what I do. And I say it's an important part. I mean, Saba is an incredibly beautiful island, as everybody who's been here, particularly us outsiders, know. It's my favorite place in the Caribbean, certainly. And part of the beauty is, beside the sea, which everybody puts an emphasis on, the fish, is the vegetation, incredibly fine vegetation, and the geomorphology, just the way the mountains are and the lava flow down below. And Sabans are very knowledgeable about their history. They can tell you what their third cousin 50 years ago did, and things like that. But the vegetation also has a history, and that's changing. And to get a good history of anything, you have to get a baseline. You have to know what it was at a given point. And for Saba, we don't know anything before 1885. I mean, there are some things you know because you generalize in the Caribbean. You can probably guava and some of the other fruit trees were brought up by the Saboni Indians. I think that's how you pronounce Saboni. It would be the Dominican one. It would come, you can almost assume that, some of the common names. But they left no writing. The original inhabitants, you could maybe infer from the names, but we'll discuss, I might have discussed it now about common names. I talked this over with Teddy Johnson, and Lead Chip is a wonderful book. That you have common names only for the plants that are useful to you, or that you want to avoid, or other things. If you don't have much to do with them, you don't see them often, they have no common names. And for this reason, most ferns, which are not useful to anybody, I find them very beautiful, don't have common names. You might have the maidenhair fern or one or two others, but you just don't have common names for them. The same is true of the indicator, what I call indicator plants in the cloud forest. Mountain mahogany, yes, somebody's singled it out as important, but there are 4 or 5 other plants and they don't have common names. Not much you can do about that. So anyway, to describe the history, there must be a starting point, and that starting point would be a well-composed inventory of the vegetation, which is where I come in. There have been other inventories, and we'll talk about them somewhere on the slides. Not yet. So, why have a well-composed vegetation inventory? Well, you can make informed judgments on the effects of physical changes, most natural and man-made, to the island. For instance, if you're dealing with invasive plants, it's a hot topic these days, and you want to look at Corellita, you can look at what was collected in 85, what was collected in 1906, what was collected in 53. These are not arbitrary points. We'll see that they're actual people. And you could look at each point, and sometimes they were written up. In 1906, a guy named Isaac Boldink, who I have no information on. There are probably Dutch sources that I can't get my hands on. But he came and collected all of the Dutch Antilles. And he wrote a flora afterward. If Corellita appears in that flora, I know it was present then. If it doesn't, I can assume it wasn't. I don't think it does. In the book I've written, I have if you had it, I would have a reference to it, and you can judge that. You can do this with many plants. You'll see another plant later. It's called Coppice polyclatus. It is an extremely common plant here. It's distributed all over the lowlands, and sometimes going up a little higher. It has no common name. And what I find fascinating about this, it has a very strange distribution. Saba, Puerto Rico, that's it. And I asked myself why, and I said, well, in Puerto Rico, it's located in the Guanaco Forest in the southwest part of the island, which is an extremely isolated area. And it's a dry forest. In fact, it's an unusual area. There are plenty of tropical wet forest, mountain forest. Guanaco is a tropical dry forest. There are many, many unusual plants. And it's distributed only in a small area there. There are other specimens I've seen that may or may not be in Anegada, which is also a very out-of-the-way island. But here, it's widely distributed. And I said to myself, that's typical of an invasive plant. Let me look at Bolding. You know, this could, if it weren't in Bolding, I could say, aha, I'm probably right. But Bolding had it. So it came in before then. You can't say it was just introduced. That's 1906. So you can learn a lot if you have very good, well-done inventories. And there are also practical reasons for people dealing with vegetation management or trying to maintain the beauty of an island. And you can say if you're trying to restore an area, you have an indication of what was there. I also give distributions of plants. I'll show you a page from the book later on. You have distributions, so you can make an informed guess, let's say, about what should be where and how we can return things to where they were. Okay, this is I wanted to show you who collected when and why. The first guy is a man named Suringa, who was at the University of Leiden. And he came, everybody you'll see on this list has one character. They came usually once for 1 month or a few weeks, and that was it. And I'll explain to you why that's a problem. He collected about 400 plants, and then got them identified. He never wrote anything. Then in 1907, there's a man named, a doctor, I think he was an employee of the Dutch government. I know absolutely nothing about him beyond that. And he collected many plants, but they were mostly cultivated plants. So even then, people had a passion for cultivated plants, which is, you'll find out, is a problem here, because they have a habit of bleeding into the flora. And finally, the big name, and greatly admire this man, was Isaac Bolding. He came between the 6th and 29th of July in 1906. Well, just 1 month. He had gone to Statia, and he also went to St. Martin and all of the southern Dutch Antilles. And he wrote this all up in a book called The Flora of the Dutch West Indies, and he published in 1909. And 4 years later, he wrote the similar flora in Dutch. I can kind of decipher the Dutch, but the Dutch version doesn't have one thing that's very, very important to me. Isaac Bolding, he collected also. He collected 1,000 specimens. He has reference to every collection. He tells you where he found it, and he does this for all the islands, so you can see the distribution. And when I was researching my book for Statia, I went to the Leiden Herbarium, and I could find most of his specimens. And check and re-identify some that needed re-identification. And he was mostly spot on. The names were, some of them are different, there are synonyms, but he was a very fine botanist. I think he finally went over to the East Indies and collected there, which is really the focal point of Dutch collecting and Dutch botany. Let me say that in terms of Dutch botany, the West Indies are a black hole. They're not very important, very much like Puerto Rico is for the Spaniards. I mean, there the big stuff was in Peru and Mexico and Cuba to a certain extent. But Puerto Rico was where you rewatered your ships and what have you. And I guess for the Dutch, you didn't even go to Saba mostly. You couldn't get off the boat. And it's partly true of Statia, but that's far more useful. But anyway, Bolding is very useful. The specimens are still there. And then there was a series of smaller collectors. There was Father Brutus. I was told by Peter's father, is the Order of Fratres, who was here, and he also collected many cultivated plants, but his focus, I think, was more the southern Dutch Antilles. He wrote a book called the Flora, Pocket Flora, which has recently been updated. So he wasn't as useful as I hoped. The next big collector was, I think, is Augustus Stoffers. He came here for 1 month, and to the other Dutch islands also. They're always done in conjunction. And he studied the vegetation extensively and collected many specimens. Then he went back to Holland, and I don't remember which herbarium he was at. He might have been at Utrecht. He started writing up books, very well detailed, very fantastic, really up to date flora for the time. But problem, he did it very slowly. He did it with others, and I think he started doing it in the 60s, and by the 70s or 80s, he developed Alzheimer's. So essentially, the flora was just cut off. So there are many families that don't exist within the flora, but what he had was very useful. He corrected a lot of the mistakes in bolding, and I used this extensively. After that, there were great collections. Nothing was written after Stoffers. New York came. They got grants to look at plant diversity. They went to one group went to Statia for a given amount of time. Another came here at 2 different times. And they stayed at Willard's, the old Willard's, and they collected a lot, but they also did a lot of collecting of ornamental plants from the grounds of Willard's, and sometimes it wasn't clear to me, and I had a terrible time writing this up, whether these plants were strictly ornamental or whether many plants bled into the flora too, and I had to, I guessed in many cases. Okay. So, and finally there's me. And I came starting in 2015, and usually for about 6 or 7 days, and just collected, walked here and there, and we'll talk about my system. None of this is rocket science, by the way. We're just trying to get basic elements, and I don't use statistical methods of telling me where to collect. We'll talk about that. So I collected many, I very carefully labeled what's wild and not wild. And I cut off, and I knew when I was done that there were more things to be seen, and I probably hadn't seen it. So this is my 13th visit. I don't know if it's unlucky or not. Yesterday we went up to the crater by way of the Sandy Cruz Trail. Almost killed me. But what happened? I found 3 new, not new to science, but new here. One of them was a very nice fern, of course. So I have to revise things. The book has been sitting at the press, waiting for a second reviewer. I guess people don't know review floras. Well, I dickered, or not I, but I should have acknowledged Carnaby Foundation at Curacao. As a non-Dutch citizen, I have to go through an organization to get any money, and they very kindly, and John de Freitas and especially went through this. But the Prince Bernard Foundation had trouble at first with the book. They're not used to publishing this kind of book, and they have very odd criterion for what they publish. And the singular sticking point of this, of publishing the book, was the fact that it will be sold for money. I mean, no press is going to do this for free. Finally, John, and he has a way, he understands them. He's been on the board. He talked to them, and then they finally let loose with 13,000 guilders for 7,000, which is a few thousand short. I'll find that money somewhere, and it will get published probably in the next 6 months. Before the end of the talk, I'll show you the similar book I did on Statia. I'll show you what it's like. Okay, beside me, there has been smaller collectors who actually collected well. Howard also wrote a book on the flora of the Lesser Antilles, everything from, I don't know, Barbados at the bottom to St. Martin at the top. He collected some. I don't know how many though. He was a remarkable botanist. He was one of the great botanists of the Antilles. He must have collected 50 or 60,000 specimens. I mean, this is incredible dealing. I'm up to about 17,600, and I know just dealing with them is something. But he was amazing. He had notebooks. He died 5 years ago. No, maybe 10 years ago. He left his notebooks to Harvard from the family. The notebooks with the specimens of Saba and Stacia were lost or something. They never arrived. So I could never find out how many he collected or what. Eventually someone will. For instance, to give you another example, I went to the Leiden Herbarium to do the Stacia work. Between then and a year ago, they digitized their whole collection. So I could do it from my home computer, find out what was there, look at a scan, see if I could tell from the scan. If I didn't, I could order the plants. And with Herbaria, we ship plants back and forth. It's getting harder, but we do. Someday Harvard will digitize, and I'll be able to figure out how many actually collected. I don't think there were that many. I don't think there were many. Fosberg corrected some. George Proctor was quite good. He found a couple that nobody else had found. George loved to do that, and he always put first record in Saba in big letters on that. And he found them, and I found them again. He had an incredible eye. David Lellinger and a guy who's still working, Andy van Prosdij. He's working on that. So this is the history of plant collection and plant knowledge and main sources in Saba. Okay, this is what I think has to go into an adequate checklist of nylon flora. You want to get as complete a set as possible. You're not going to get a complete set. My method of collecting is to go on the trails and occasionally go off into the woods. When this is limited, like when I was in Stacia. In Stacia, I just bet there are specimens that people have never seen, provided you could rappel down the quill. and I'm at my age, I'm not going there. Maybe if I were younger, I'm not going there either. But you never know what's complete. So I get as complete as possible, and there's always going to be. And prepare a set of specimens of each plant. This is the tedious part of being a botanist. You'll see a picture later. I would go back and forth with a press and a bag and go wherever I could, and I'd see other plants that other collectors had collected. I'd try to find them, especially with New York, since it wasn't that long ago. So I'd go there, and at the end of the day, I take the plants to Celera Dunia, and Celera, they're remarkable people there. I don't know many hotel owners who would allow you to set up a dryer in their bathroom and run it 24 hours. This is what we did. I mean, some wooden hotels, of course, I wouldn't want to do it in, and Hemi did it without batting an eyelash. There's not a question. He even had an extension cord and what have you. So I'd go home, I'd put a number on a sheet, I'd enter it in a field notebook and try and get a decent looking specimen, put it into the dryer, and that sometimes after being out in the field all day, it'd be another 3 or 4 hours. Some days I'd collect 100 plants or more. And I had to get it reasonably dry. I have permits from here, from the conservation thing. I also have permits from the U.S. Department of Agriculture taking plants in. That's always a nightmare because you never know. You get a new inspector wants to read the fine prints and what have you. So you try to have the specimens as dry as possible so there are no bugs hanging around. Says, oh, look at that, look at that. Okay, so that's what. And why go to this trouble? Well, the example I gave you of bouldering, I may be wrong on the things I do, but someone at least can check my work and tell if we're wrong and then revise things like I did with bouldering. It's good to have a list of the island, but there was a list of the specimens of Saba by Anna Rogier. I keep bumping into that. And there are mistakes in it. It's a good first approximation, but there are definite mistakes and mistakes have a habit of getting perpetuated. And at some point they have to be corrected. And I try to get as accurate as possible so people can use this as a benchmark when they're writing invasive planted things, when they're studying vegetation or what have you. The other thing, these specimens were a permanent record. Specimens that Linnaeus made in the 1750s are still usable in Uppsala. Ones from which the name of a plant come, you can use it as standard. Maybe I'll talk about that later, but it gets too long about how you name a plant. So you can get a complete set after only many visits, and I had made until this time 12 collecting trips. And to give you a comparison, I think I did this before about the number of collecting trips in Statia. I made 11. Here, this is my 13th. Puerto Rico, it says 350. We're trying to estimate. It was 20 years of collecting. And if you collect, the sphinx moths are great these days. If he's trying to interrupt me, I lost it. I lost the thread. This is terrible at my age. Someday you're going to lose it permanently, but hopefully not tonight. Okay. The number of trips over 20 years, 11 collecting trips, 12 specimens. We'll go on. You cut the Gordian knot. Okay, this is somewhat redundant, but the reason many trips are necessary is that there are some, for some of the herbaceous material, it's not there at sometimes a year. I cut my teeth as a person identifying. I would identify what nobody else wanted to touch in the herbarium. Everybody wants to do the flowering plants. What did I work on? Grasses, weeds, composites, and things like this. If you go to a herbarium, these are always pushed off to an expert. I went right for them. So I was good at weedy material, and I really have a fairly complete, spectrum of the weeds in Statia, and there are many of them. But even to get that, you have to collect as many times a year as you can, preferably about 4. And beside getting them, it's valuable to have a distribution of where they are, so you'll find them in different places, and the phenology, a distribution of the phenology, by which I mean when they fruit or when they flower. So if somebody else wanted to find such and such a plant and flower, will know December or something. That's always part of what I do. Not only the area, also the height distribution and what have you. I've done that. And beside finding that, there's the noticing factor. I don't know how to put it. I've gone to usually the Sandy Cruz or the Mount Cerny Trail at least 10 times. You can go 1 or 2 times, you may not be looking at the right place. The next time you go, you see it, or something's in flower you haven't seen before. So it's easy to miss. And what makes it easy from a trail, you at least have a view. I am very poor at being able to identify things that are way up in the canopy. I don't know, vision or what have you. Someone like Jim Johnson or maybe Tom there can look and say, that's that. I need a specimen. But anyway, so I do that. I would go many times over the same place. I tried to explore as many places as I could in the island. There are places I never got to. say the area, the North Coast Trail, we went in about 1 kilometer from the salt mine, that area. And then I just didn't like it. I don't like trails you can't follow, which is the North Coast Trail around there. And then the North Coast Trail beyond, got to Mary's Point, but beyond there are problems. There are other areas like that I didn't get to, but I think the Giles Trail is another one we never went on. I don't like long stretches under the sun. I had a bad experience going down from the airport down to Spring Bay. I almost didn't make it back up on a hot day. So, but I'm not sure there's a wide spectrum of plants in the dry areas. They're very, very poor distribution of plants. Okay. So anyway, that will deal with multiple collection. Physical specimens, I think I've said, important. I mean, there are people who can go out like James and what have you, but it's to me it's not science till you actually collect. When you actually reproduce the results, you can look at the results and check the work. It has to be evidence-based to be science. And lists of names without evidence, as I say, they're useful to check there, to see if they're there, what have you, but it cannot be used as a base for other work. Then another part of my work, and I've mentioned this also, is going after the historical record and checking the evidence of previous floras. I went through every entry and bolding. It's on the web, so it's great. Every entry to check the name, you have to, it's not simple because it's usually under other names. Sometimes if you look at Stouffer's, he will tell you that he meant this and what have you. You have to say what name he went, and this can be a problem with older names. Unless you have a specimen, you don't know what plant they're talking about. They might use something, they may be wrong, but unless you actually have a specimen, you don't know whether it was really there or it was something else. It's very important to look back. Finally, publishing the work, it's important to make it available to everybody, and so someone can pick it up and look at it. Unfortunately, it's not a pretty work in the sense of having lots of pictures and what have you. It's pretty dry. In fact, when I was first starting out, I was using a similar book by Leogier in Puerto Rico, and I said to the person I was helping in the field, he said, "What use is this work?" It took me 20 years to figure out how useful they really are. It's useful more to experts than that. But if you want to know something about the plant, it's where you find. And these are the books I've published, and I used a very old name, Systematic Vademecum to the Vascular Plants of Puerto Rico. Vademecum, I think, is most recently known, maybe 20, 30 years ago, as a toothpaste. But in the 19th century, it was a word for a guidebook. It means in Latin, go with me, and it's meant to take with you in the field. Jeannie, can I see the book? I can pass it around and people can look at it. So this one you can. It has a great cover, won't fall off. The one in Puerto Rico, my covers are all fall off. But you can get a look. There are some pictures. I did have a map of Statia, in fact, 2 maps. And those of you who know Hannah Madden, she was absolutely super, and I have a similar trail map. And I think that's it for the pictures, but here, you can pass it around while we're looking at the pictures. Aha, now we get to the pictures and everybody can wake up. This is me, what goes on in the nitty-gritty of collecting. This is the wall of the road right near the Spring Bay Gap. And what did I see there with this Anthurium grandifolium. I wanted a good specimen. Sometimes cases arrive when you don't know whether the name you're using is correct or not, and I can truly say I don't know. This is what's been used traditionally, but the big expert on this, named Tom Croat, and he's in Missouri. He's about my age. And first thing I sent to him, I sent a specimen that he couldn't see what's called the sinus very well. For every plant, a little thing in plant identification, there are specific characters you want to look at. And anthuriums, you can barely tell anything from the reproductive organ. You can tell more from the way the veins go. And I had folded it wrong, and he gave me a lecture over the internet of what a terrible specimen, blah, 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 blah. So I had to collect more. So I did this. I wound up winding up there, causing a minor landslide on the road, which my wife and I had to quickly grab stone by stone and try and fit back. But I did get what I wanted, and at least I put some scale on it. And if you just coming beyond Spring Gay and you look up, you'll see a lot of them right there. But this is the trials and tribulations of Anthurium grandifolium. I do know the name of it. I think it's monkey tail. I think I got it right. And this is what goes on the trail. This is the Bottom Mountain Trail. Teddy Johnson insists it calls it Bottom Hill Trail. But I don't know. Everything has Bottom Mountain now, and names change and what have you. So what happens when you're walking along the trail, and I stuff things in a paper bag unless it's really dry. What you don't want to happen is have the leaves curl on you. Uncurling a leaf is a very difficult job once it happens. So I absolutely love the St. Martin Heralds. It was made for plant collecting. Now they have these very thin, small papers. You have to double them up, but I'm a big fan of St. Martin Herald. So you put them in, you try to fold them up. You know approximately what a specimen will look like. We'll see some later. They're about 18 by 13 or so. At least in the United States, it's standard. You go to Europe, they're all kinds of sizes. Okay, here, this is not. I didn't see much of this in here in Saba. It's Piper peltata. It's a peltate leaf. And I think that's the only place I saw it. It's right toward the base of the Bottom Mountain Trail. That's what I'm pressing here, and it's larger than the sheet, so I have to figure out how to fold it so it looks good. You always, after a while, when you're working this, you always have your idea of the herbarium sheet, and if you get a good mounter, a herbarium sheet could almost be an object of art. Really well done. And this is the other stuff in a pile, which I have to sort out little by little, and Jean's helping me arrange things there. A fine fate for a professor of anatomy. Wind there's nothing worse than pressing plants in a roaring wind. And my digging knife and all. But it's fun. We've had a lot of fun on the trail, especially. And this is what happens at night at Celeradunia. You can see. We picked, I think we picked the Dutch Reform windows. That's fancy. But I have a plant press here. I've filled it with some stuff. I usually have cardboard dividers, and for the very thick plants, I have metal to conduct the heat more. And I have just a portable heater, a Lasco heater, and you put pressure on them, and you put them on front of it, and then gradually they'll dry out. But it's not fun when you're up to 10 to 11 pressing plants after a day in the field. Okay, and I want to show you what the result of a press is. We'll talk about I think they're called the tuck head here, melocactus. This is the, remember I told about Microcarpus polyclatus? It has a little white head, as you see there. And now you go out and you'll see this all over, low down. It's very, very common. This is what a specimen looks like when it's properly cared for. I thought this looked very nice. You can't see the detail. The color has changed. The moth wasn't on there when I collected it. And you try to get as best a representation of the plant you can. And now it's gotten fancy. My main job is the being the collections manager of the herbarium. This is the whipped cream. This is why I do that, going out and collecting plants. Main job is making sure that the collections are properly identified. I have to guide students. Now I'm in charge of the database. We database everything. And we scan and what have you. These are 800 pixels per inch. DPI, what's that mean? I mean, decapixel? What?
Dots per inch.
Dots per inch, okay. Dots per inch. So these are fairly high, and eventually they get put on the internet. We do have a website, and I haven't updated the Saba stuff, but it should get on within the next 6 months. And here is a typical label. I put Flora of Saba, the University of Puerto Rico. The name Microcarpus polyclatus. It was named by Orban, so you put the name of the author. And then here's the information I have in the label. It's English Quarter, Spring Bay Trail. Trail just, I can't read it, beyond Spring Bay Flat, okay. You probably read it better than close up. Then what? Okay, xeric area, it's a dry area. So I give a little ecological information, elevation about 235 meters, I give the coordinates, and then I give a little erect suffrutescent herb, I mean it's woody-like suffrutescent, and it has a white flower. You tend to put information on a label that will be lost in the process of drying. That's why I don't put a height here. If I cut something from a tree, I always put the size of the tree, so because you won't know it. And then the collection people, I don't know, my 14,000 something, and the date, and the family. Family's there mostly for people filing it. So that's true in every label, modern label. The thing is, in the 19th century, they were really skimpy. Never in a label of Suringa or Bolding did I ever see any information about the plant. Never. Sometimes there'd be something on top of there'd be location on top of the mountain. Sometimes that was left out. Sometimes the pre-printed labels would have the wrong, it would be a Saba and it was for St. Martin. Now I'm looking at St. Martin, and there's this plant I have there that supposedly was found, I forget, was either here or Statia. And 4 other plants similar with the St. Martin, something crossed out and St. Martin put in. Maybe it was Saba crossed out St. Martin. But the 5th one, he didn't do that, so people believed it was in Saba. Here you have to make almost a criticism of dealing with an old text, the same kind of thing. I think he was mistaken and just forgot to cross it out, and it doesn't belong there. But a lot of times that mistake is made, and then the plant is put there, and people look for it. So they were very skimpy with label information, and you have to compensate for it. It makes it a little harder to identify. This is what a herbarium looks like. We're in conjunction with the museum. As I tell the kids when I'm giving a herbarium talk, we don't have any animals bobbing up and down and falling, anything like this. This is not sexy. But it's like looking at the spines of library books. We have case after case. I'll show you the big picture after this. This is a family folder. Everything down here after a certain point of the family. This is a Fern family. And what makes life more complicated is with new DNA is that families are changing and you have to relabel plants and put labels on this. This is my daily routine, having to do this. So you do this, and each one of these folder has a specimen according to species, and there are a whole case holds about 1,000 specimens. I feel like a timpani player. Has about 1,000 specimens. Our whole herbarium is a relatively small herbarium. It has about 60,000. Leiden probably has 3 or 4 million. I don't know, even more now that they've added Utrecht and Wageningen. So this is what a herbarium, folders for storing specimens by family. And it's done simply. You go to older herbaria, and they store families by older systems. It's like they were doing the Dewey Decimal System or something like that. And so you don't know, unless you know what the theory of the evolution of plants was, that what's related to what. You don't know what to expect in the next cabinet unless you look at a list on the side and a number. To simplify matters, and a small herbarium can do this. Alphabetical by family, that's it. With one exception, the ferns are separate from the dicots. We make the monocots and dicots together, if that means anything to you, mostly because the boundary between them has gotten very blurred, like the Piperaceae is sometimes in the middle. So they said the hell with it, they're all going together. So the grasses and the Piperaceae are all in the peas. This is what a whole cabinet looks like. And we had a terrible time after Maria. The electricity was wiped out. A herbarium specimen can last almost forever, with the exception of fires, mold, and insects. Fires aren't an issue here. Almost everything in Puerto Rico is built out of concrete. Mold can be a problem, and the mold was going up. It was like 70% or so, and Gene and I would walk in every day to open the windows to drop the humidity. So after a month or so of this, and then insects can wipe out a herbarium in 6 months. Domestic beetles. It's amazing how much damage they can do. Well, they decided to move it. We had to strip everything out of the cabins, put them in boxes, and they had to take them down the stairs. The elevator didn't work. Banged up some of the cabinets. It was a mess. But you see a row like this, and the next one you'll see the whole system. And we had compactors. They were glued in. We had to rip them out of the compactors, and that's the remaining. And we don't have any funds to fix them. This is Puerto Rico, the government. But the compactors sort of work, and we get along. Okay. We have some bench work. This is the final estimate on the flora that I found. 771 different species, varieties, everything. I call them taxon. Taxon singular, taxa plural. Genera and families, that really, I don't find it meaningful. I have to say we have to add 3 to that as of yesterday. Native, about 560. Exotic, meaning we can truly prove they're exotic. I have a very different criterion from the people who are writing lists of invasive plants. To me, a plant is native unless proved otherwise, unless you can actually show it's come after a point. There are plants that people had put on lists because it wasn't very common here. I think the white cedar or something, they had that on the list. And I asked a friend who's an expert. They said it probably is here. And you don't know for sure why turn into that. And truly, all plants all species are invasive to an island. Got to come in somehow. I think what really makes the difference in islands is when they come in and the order they came in and the effects on the soil and not a simple matter. But so we have about 2.5 times as many native as exotics, and we have a lot. I speak almost as a Saban now. We have a problem of people getting exotic plants and putting them in the garden, and sometimes things happen they don't anticipate, like Coralita, pretty little house plant from Mexico. And now it's in Puerto Rico. It's a problem, a slight problem. There are so many invasive plants in the city anyway. You don't have large urban areas where you have what do you call them? Weedy gardens. Somehow, but anyway, you can see the ferns. We have 86 now flowering plants, and the largest groups are the invasive ones. The grasses, most of your grasses have come in from Africa and things, and a lot of them were brought in as pasture. In Puerto Rico, we have lots of African pasture grasses, and they come from elsewhere. And then we have the famous Donna grass, which supposedly came in Hurricane Donna. That's your major weedy grass. But you do have a couple of native grasses. Well, you have more than a couple. I guess more than half. Pea family tends to be very invasive. The composite family are very invasive, and these you get the largest numbers. They're very adaptable to new environments, and in they go. And euphorbs, I won't go them all, but the rest are much smaller. But this is probably, and anywhere you go, these would be the major four. Now we get to the pictures, and no particular order. As a collector, it was either collecting plants or taking pictures. And my first job was collecting, so I don't take many pictures, okay? I do have some real pictures at the end. These are scans of plants I really like. And this one you'll tell, it's not a tree fern. It's about yay high, and it has a very well-branched stuff. And it has this beautiful, beautiful red-haired base. And it was not known from here before. Ferns can be difficult to identify, which is a reason people can avoid them. And this is known more from South America, so I don't know if it's known much from the Antilles itself. I made for plants. You might ask how you make specimens out of big plants. Well, you use as many sheets as you need. This has 2 sheets. Okay, one I did up to the first leaf, and also the top, and then the middle. I want to give a little. I cut that, and then you can't see it, but you also have them mounted with the fertile side and the sterile side. You always mount plants with both sides. It's very important for characters. You learn in collecting that certain plants have certain characters, and you collect the plants accordingly to highlight those characters. Some plants, the flowers are you don't need them really. The Rubiaceae, a whole family, all white flowered stuff, but the fruits, indeed. Others, it's the flowers. Some you can just look at the venation of the leaves, and it's absolutely that. So it's something you learn with. To me, plant identification, I have long discussions with people, we did this yesterday. To me, it's not really science, and I mean, making a specimen it's a skill, it's an art, and you learn it over a length of time. When I first collected, I never remembered where the plants were. Now I can remember practically every plant I collected, with one exception, and we'll get to the endemic plant here, the one that grows only here. Unfortunately, one day and I don't remember exactly where I got it, but we'll talk about the latter. The other 2 parts of the heresy are telling me I'm going too slowly here. Okay. Yeah. All right. This is what you do with a tree fern. I didn't do all 3. I just did 2 of the 3 but you just take parts. Tree ferns, you usually like to get part of the base too, because they have certain scales, and so you can do this also. But you can clearly see 2 sides. I don't know. Maybe I'm not the best in the world, but you can see these have the sori, the brown parts. I think they'd be more visible if on another screen. I think in most of our specimens you can see that. You can see the spines and the leaves. I'm showing you ferns. This is about the hazards of collecting. This deals with Peter Johnson, my son, and my son's former girlfriend. I don't know, former 2, former 3, former 4, one of the 2. somewhere around there. Anyway, it's this cliff. There was an orchid on this cliff, and they went after it. This is the orchid. It's Cyclist Corelli. It's a very beautiful orchid. It has a very long stem. Fortunately, because I think orchids that exist on the Mount Scenery Trail don't last long. They get plucked and put in people's gardens. This one tends to grow in very protected places like the top of Fort Bay Hill. Is that the name of it? Or Grand Hill? As you go down to Fort Bay, the big hill on the right, I think really the top is called it. It's gorgeous. It has a long peduncle, which is a flowering stem, and these purple flowers on top of it. And this is a growth habit, not this. This is your eyelash orchid. This is this orchid, and these are the stems. Okay? It can be sometimes a half a meter. And my son is very careful to point out that this was not the one that was collected. There was another one. This was too nice. So what they did was, I think his girlfriend sat on Peter's legs, and Amitai somehow held on or took the picture. And Peter reached over and grabbed the specimen for me. Oh, he grabbed the picture. Right.
This is a different plant.
I know, I said it's a different plant.
So, anyways,
Okay.
there was a rope involved.
Oh, there was a rope involved too. Okay, this is my heroic son after the conquest. So I've almost gone over cliffs sometimes getting plants. At least it's better doing it that way than taking a selfie. Like seems to be the fashion nowadays. Okay. And this is generally the pictures I did take because I usually had a purpose. Sometimes I just don't know whether different species. This is used to be Maxillaria coccinea, but names change. If somebody asks me a question later, I'll tell you why. Normally, in Puerto Rico, it's bright red. It's a bright saturated red. And this is very high up. This is definitely a cloud forest plant. Here it's yellow, and then one I found it in the peach-colored one. I didn't know whether I had the same species. The orchid expert is Jim Ackerman, who we talked to last week. It's his main thing, and he told me that they're the same ones. But it's a beautiful little thing. And it can be found in the area near the third bench, somewhere in there. But it's one of the smallest. It's an epiphytic orchid. It's to be found on rotting logs and things like that. Then other kinds of orchids. This is fairly common in the ground. It's a terrestrial orchid. It grows only in dirt. Orchids can be most air plants. They can be terrestrial in the ground, epiphytic on top of a plant of some kind, or they can be epilithic on top of rock. This one is strictly this. This is, again, there was a name change. Microcollis is new name change. Common names don't change. That's their main advantage. The problem is, except from island to island, village to village. But if you have a common name, it's going to be that for life. It's not going to be the case with any scientific name you have because scientific names are based on the evolution and relationship of plants. And as DNA gets finer and finer and you get a closer picture of what the relationships of plants, there's more splitting in the genera, there's changing around, and names change, and you got to live with it. I mean, I think in some cases on the old name, and I have to correct myself mentally, and other people just complain about it, particularly horticulturalists. But anyway, that's microcollis. It's a small flower. Most orchids you find in nature, in fact, most plants you find in the tropics, the flowers are small. A lot of them are fly-pollinated, bee-pollinated, not bat-pollinated or bird-pollinated. So anyway. And now we get to the specimens, as I wanted to show you the eyelash orchid. This grows both on rocks and on trees, and it's the most common orchid in Puerto Rico. Oh, you also notice we barcode now, we have an accession number and what have you. So there's all kinds of tasks for me now, and I have students, and I spend as much time correcting them as I do if I did it myself. This is one of my favorite plants. You know that, don't you? That's not an orchid. It can be found only in the cloud forest in the top. It's Utricularia alpina. Again, no common name. It belongs to the Lentibulariaceae, but it's a family of hemiparasites. They what?
Bladderwort.
Bladderwort. Yeah, the bladderwort family. Exactly. But they don't have leaves. They have leaf-like appendages, and they either extract. They can be they're slightly they can be insectivorous or what have you, and you can find them on the wall of filmy ferns on the very. I found them on the trail past the building toward the rock with the plaques on it. It's in there. Usually in December. It's not all year. Very beautiful little flower. This is, I think people have used strictly mountain mahogany as an indicator. This is Marilla Racemosa, and it has a curved fruit too. This too grows only in the upper zone. It's a very nice plant, and I occasionally find it in flower. There's a nice big tree near the last bench. Again, no common name. Now this is a problem. This is my son discovered. This is the tuckhead we saw before. He came across this. I was completely astounded. Never seen the white one. Beyond my pay grade, I'd say. I wrote away. I found out you can do, if you look in the herbarium index of herbarium, they have a list of people in herbariums, and I wanted to know a specialist in cactuses and malacactus. So I took that picture. I will take pictures for reasons. I sent away to him. And I said, it looks like a Turk's head. What is this? And he says it's a very rare form of the Turk's head cactus. But it was absolutely gorgeous. So every identification of plants is not a cut and dried matter. There's some I've gone back and forth on many times trying to figure it out. Yeah. Ferns are particularly difficult. I love this. This is another thing found only in the cloud forest. It's a bromeliad. We're out here at Banana. You can find it on the top of what's called the true summit, the side path up top, and on there where it's beautiful red flower there. Nice thing about some camera, you can date it. I found it in December, so. Aha, now we get to my favorites. I really love the ferns here. I find the ferns the most attractive part of the flora. Tomorrow we're going on a fern walk. I don't know how many IDs we'll do. I went on the trail yesterday. There are far fewer ferns than I remember before Maria. We will go, I want to go all the way to the bench, because that last part has a lot of interesting things. So those of you who have any problems, bear that in mind. This is something you wouldn't imagine. I mean, I was astounded the first time I saw this. If you're a botanist, you know what I'm talking about. This is a filmy fern. This is one cell layer thick. It will grow only in the very moist parts of the forest. And this rock was covered with it. You probably walked by a rock like that hundreds of times. They're absolutely lovely little things. What do we call them? And this is another filmy fern. This you've seen walls with this. Again, one cell layer thick. Looks very attractive as on a herbarium sheet. There are fertile points in it. You can't see it here, but you can distinguish them by that. Maybe that's, I don't know, if it's dead. No, that's just dead leaves. Can't really see it on the here. But that's the most common filmy fern in the top area. It's cloud forest and slightly below it. They need a lot. Sometimes you used to be able to see it on the Sandy Cruz Trail. Further on beyond, we went up to the summit yesterday, and I didn't go beyond the Elephant Forest turnoff. And I'm hoping there's much more to see there. And then there are just plain cute little ferns, and this you find lower down. I've found it in the trail I don't know if it's called the Buds Mountain, the one between the Echo Lodge going up toward the mountain, or maybe it's the Buds Mountain. It's up toward, there's a little ridge you go over, and it was there. It's also on the base of the Sandy Cruz Trail at the bottom. It's common, but it's a nice little thing. It's probably, no, my hand is too, probably that's inch to 2 inches. Now we get to another aspect of my talk. Ornamental plants and whether they go in a flora or not. This is a little beyond the bench in the Sandy Cruz Trail, flowering practically all the year. As you go down is this bunch of Eucharis amazonica. It may have a common name, I don't know it. What?
Eucharis lily, that's all.
Eucharis lily. It was probably planted, but it's a permanent fixture now, and it flowers practically all the year. So I put it in the flora. Okay, it's there. And this is all really a judgment call on my part. I put it in the flora, and then we have this. This floored me. We were going to the ladder, and there in somebody's house on the right was this. Yeah, it was the big bush, small tree with this. And I said, I don't know. Where's it from? It wasn't until I got home and it dawned on me. There's a not common but not uncommon plant that grows in the seashore in Puerto Rico called Bontia daphnoides, and it was there. And then I asked myself, what is it doing in a guy's front yard? You know, there's an ornamental. It could possibly be in Saba, but I said no. It's in such healthy conditions. I wouldn't put it in the flora. It's got to be straight ornamental. I hadn't seen it elsewhere. If I saw a couple more, yes, I would go. And then we get to the nasty part of the Puerto Rican flora. This will be your next great invasive plant, and you know, people love it because it's big red flowers. At home we have a terrible time with it. We have a little called the Quebrada, a little stream that runs drainage behind the house, and we had enormous ones, and they're beautiful, threatening to fall on one. But that's not the worst thing. They produce thousands of seeds, and then you have to pluck it out, or you get one of the big ones. And that's happening here. I've seen about 4 or 5 of them already, and this is the seed pod. I mean, I had several things: either get rid of them or bring in macaws. We have macaws who live, and they go out and then they eat on it. So this is the African tulip tree, Spathodia campanulata. And then there's something called trouble, which is sort of part of the flora now. These are usually purple leaves. I didn't have a good ones. And the first plant I collected, I think, with James Johnson, and I should have recognized that. So, and this deals with a whole matter of invasive species, and Elizabeth has probably talked about it. I don't get worked up about invasive plants. I think it's a man-made issue, and it's more of an aesthetic issue than a problematic issue. To me, the worst invasive plant is probably native, the chinnery, elephant ear, whatever you call it. Big, what do they call it? You see it in the mountains. I mean, it's something, the big elephant ear. I think they call it chinnery. That's a problem, but I think it's native, and it's just what it is. Eventually, with most invasions, they die back. That happened with the lionfish. The true invasions that you have to worry about, and it won't be so much here, are coffee rusts, things that affect crops, animals that do that, plants. Maybe in Australia and South Africa, where you have lantana running wild, it's a mild thing. That and dealing with incredible amounts of acreage. But invasive plants aren't going to do much problems. They might be an eyesore. But if people aren't unwilling to clean up their yards, they're going to have Corellita here. It's just a fact of life. Okay. And then there's the environmental problems. I think that's well named. I check it. This is what happens. This is seen from Tyus Hill. It's just habitat neglect, and then you're also going to have problems. There was a canyon in Puerto Rico, Cañón Cristobal, which had a waterfall of old cars. It was really impressive. Going down the slope, there are cars in various parts. Miraculously, they cleaned it up at one point. I'm told it's really, really nice there now. I mean, sometimes that's going to happen. You have dumping on across the Middle Island Trail from the Wells Bay Road. There are things that have to be dealt with in part. Sabre, of course, is infinitely better than most places. I'm now working in St. Martin, and what goes on there is frightening. There are lots of beautiful parks there. Now we get to the story of the endemic species, endemic plant. Endemic means that it grows here, nowhere else in the world. And this, as I say, I've looked 2 or 3 times. I might have it this time. I won't know till I get home. This particular group of ferns is very hard to identify. You have to look at the hairs. Are they star-shaped? You have to look at the venation in there. And I'm not good enough to do it in the field. I can do it when I get home and dry it and look in the microscope. And I also have backup, a guy at the University of California. We were checking out the new trail in August of 18. No, not August. I forget. May was it?
It says August.
Oh, it does say. I can't read it.
It says May.
May, yeah. My son went there, bossed ahead, and I was in there with him, and I just randomly picked up fern, something I don't know, so I had no idea where I got it from, and I thought it was something else, Tholipterus germinans. This would also be a Tholipterus too, but now they split the whole thing, and we can get into that. And there's a preface to the story. I had borrowed all kinds of specimens from Leiden, and one of them was the fern, and it was not really assigned a name, and there was a great fern guy in the 30s, not the 30s, 50s, 60s, C.B. Morton, and he said, it looks like a big something other, but I don't really know what it is. So I collected this plant, and I gave it what I thought it was. And one of the things you do when you collect specimens, you usually collect more than one. And with ferns, I would be sending him stuff all the time. He'd help me identify difficult groups. Alan Smith, and as he said, with this group, I know more about this than any man on the planet. And this wasn't just chutzpah, he knew what he was talking about. It was quite correct. So I would, and in return for helping me, I'd send him all the fern duplicates. So he has one of the largest collections of ferns of Saba outside of Puerto Rico. So I sent it to him, and he wrote back, you know that fern we couldn't identify? I had transferred the specimen with Leiden to him. I did all the paperwork. He said, that's what we were looking at before. This is it. This is new. So this is the brand new specimen. My son and I and Peter went back in August of 18 after Maria to find it again. I was desperate. It was all overgrown with young tree ferns. Couldn't find it. And we went back again. And I have some candidates, but I'm not sure. It's really overgrown in there. It's hard to pick out. This would be a small fern. You can measure it from side. And there are a lot of things that look like that. Maybe that's a good thing. You worry with a fern, something like that, of people who have no value. It's as trophy hunters. There may not be much of it. So that's our unique Sabin plant. Okay, this is what, if you looked at the St. Stacia book, it's going to be very similar. It's very dry reading. You have the family, you have the typical, this is what happens when you're doing more of a scientific study. You give the name of the plant, you give the person who first named it, and you give it another name, and the new people, and the literature citation. And then you give important things, different synonyms, names that have been used for it before. So you could, with this book, look up in bold ink, in the index, one of these, if he'd used it, and you could track down, it would say C. nephrolepis browni. And then here it's a terrestrial fern, not there are epiphytic ferns and terrestrials. And here I gave places I'd collected. This is a very common invasive, we call it a weedy fern, almost everywhere in the Caribbean. I think it's from Asia or Africa. So it was the village, Wells Bay Road. We saw it going up the Sandy Cruz Trail yesterday, St. John's, Windward Side, almost anywhere you can imagine, up to 710 meters. It produces spores from February to August, and these are the numbers of my specimens. So anybody wants to check out stuff, they can know. And when New York came, these are the number I quote their specimens to. And it's native to tropical Africa and tropical Asia. The only reference to it is in Howard's book on the Antilles, and he doesn't have it for Saba. So I give this because then people can go look at the description of it, even if it doesn't occur in Saba. Then we have a native fern, Nephrolepis rivularis, which looks very similar. It's terrestrial. I think it can be also slightly epiphytic. Again, the same thing, the literature quotation. The Basioninum is the name it first had, and the same here. It was terrestrial, Upper Hell's Gate, Windward Side, et cetera, and my numbers and Maury. And then here, it's Antilles. It's now when it's not native, I put native 2. This little thing you can always follow. It means it's not native. Here it'd be native Antilles, Trinidad and Tobago, southern Mexico, Central America, northern. It's a common neotropic fern. Then here it would be a quotation. This is from Bolding's book, page 3, and he used another name, Nephrolepis exaltata. I put it this way: the name he used was not a synonym; it was straight misidentification. So it's his name as. And then the correct name is in Stoffer's, Volume 1, Folio 1, page 24. And it's also, and it is for Saba, it doesn't say not for Saba. And it's also in Howard on page 228. Okay. That's how I deal with the regular stuff. And you can see that in the other book. Then this is what I do that's different, I think, from other people. Those are things that I include this in the flora, but I give it a little side part. This is stuff that hasn't been recently collected, so you can tell that this may not be there anymore. You don't know, or maybe something to look for. The same stuff I do with the name is there, but then I don't give a distribution. I said it was collected in somewhere between the 22nd and 27th April on top of the mountain. Surungai, he never numbered his specimens, so it's SN Sino numero. And as usual, he didn't even give the location. Okay, so it's okay. So that and it's also native. It's in the Lesser Antilles and Greater Antilles, and here it is known for Saba. And then I give a note. Sometimes I put notes. Bolding in his book cited the Surungai specimens, which is seen neither by Stoffer nor by me. This is another iffy choice. Often when I saw this, I would put it of dubious status and not put it in the flora. For some reason, I decided it would be. I know I've seen it in Statia, in the quill. I gave it the benefit of the doubt. All right, this is the dubious status occurrence. Here you can almost get Stictocardia tilifolia. It's a morning glory family plant. And here I even put what the name was in the original thing. And it was 1906, locality unknown. I don't have since I have a specimen, I didn't have a specimen for the Surungai, so I couldn't quote anything. Bolding didn't give a number. So I give the Utrecht number of the sheet. They've now put numbers on, so people can go look at that. And I hadn't seen the specimens of the previous one. Here I saw the scan, so people can have some confidence in what I was looking at. And here it's native to the southern tropical Africa, Taiwan, Japan, and it's in Howard's Volume 6 and not for Saba. And then the notes, I said 1909, he doesn't cite this taxon, and 1913 it cites it only for St. Eustatius, which on the label has been crossed out and replaced by Saba, okay? So it's almost like chasing a literary criticism down, or looking for Bacon and the signs, Shakespeare and the works of Bacon, sort of thing. This ambiguity of island, together with the fact that the label also contains neither date nor specific locality, makes the citation dubious. So you have to kind of make almost literary judgments of accuracy in some of this. So I get rid of, and then the other things I got rid of are things only for cultivation. Galphemia, it's a little tree in the Malpighiaceae. It may be on the road. I never saw it. I never saw it one way or the other, so I say no. So there is more than just identifying here. You have to go through sources and you have to make decisions. And then we can look, we'll reach the end. This is Mount Scenery, yes. Seen from the balcony of Celeradunia, like we saw there. And we love watching the airplanes come in and go. I think that's it. Now it's time for questions. Yeah.
I have a question. Yeah, I'm more a marine than a terrestrial person. And
You're forgiven.
And well, you quite likely know that the Saba just recently established a national park, a terrestrial national park.
No, terrestrial. No, I didn't know.
Yes.
You Kai?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, we've met, but I don't have a memory face to it.
Okay.
Okay.
So the big question is now, okay, I know how to do the marine park. For recently, we had a new threat, which is this stony coral tissue disease. And
What kind of tissue?
It's a disease, a coral disease, which is threatening our coral reefs.
Oh, coral.
And we learn how to identify those diseases and how to possibly deal with it. Now, when it comes to terrestrial issues, we do how we go about things like that. You know, I mentioned on top of Mount Scenery during the time of the drought that the Mount Fuji,
I remember, yeah.
Mount Fuji suddenly got diseased severely. So now, how can we react?
Yeah, I remember your email. I belong to the same thing. Not a lot you can do. You know, there are things that could happen here easily, like the cactus diseases going around that affect the Pilosa cereus, the columnar cactus, and also some affecting the melastone now. And basically, I think you have to wait the course. And I think that was what the answer someone gave to you, who was, am I right here, Elizabeth? You would know more about issues of, I hate to put you on the spot, but you've dealt with invasive biology, and often there's nothing you can do except wait for the terminal, or what you did, write an email to something like that to someone who has a solution. We have problems we've had the problems of columnar cactus for a couple of years. It gets the growing part, and it's horrible. There's such beautiful things, but I'm told the melastomes have it. Then the white cedar is the tababuya. That has gotten thrips, and you get a shriveling of the leaves, and it's common. And you have to be able to put out money for it. Puerto Rico's not going to put out any money for anything in a while. After they fix our potholes, they'll believe it. But I think the best thing to do is to write there, and then you find people who deal with invasive stuff. But that's the worst kind of invasive stuff you can have. But what the fuchsia was a fungus or a mold, and sometimes what happens is the conditions stress the plants so far, the thresholds are very vulnerable. And the minute things get better, the resistance comes. Yeah. Yeah. That's not gonna happen with the cactuses.
But you know, there's supposed to be somebody who can ring the alarm bells and it's okay. Hey,
Yeah. No. You're right.
So bad.
I know with invasive plants and things like their journals, there's a kind of network, and you can get answers like that, but that's going to happen. Yeah, I was told I was going to be inundated with questions. You can't realize how disappointing this is to me.
I have another question.
Yes, good.
So
We can keep this up all night.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Keep it very general. So next thing the Saber's going to do, they're going to establish a botanical garden. What should be in the botanical garden?
I tell you an anecdote. We were in Spain in July, and there's a wonderful botanical garden in Malaga. Okay, I get the pronunciation. And I was reading TripAdvisor to find out about it, and I always like to read negative reviews. And one guy came at the wrong side. He was complaining they didn't have any flowers for us there, and they were ones were very small. You know, he was expecting to go to Monet Gardens, but so I don't know. People are going to want to see big showy flowers. I guess most people will come. This is a problem. But you should, and it depends where you're located here. It's going to be middle, or I mean, you could give. It's always interesting to have, say, typical local plants like things on the Spring Bay. Spring Bay has a lot of nice mesic flower things that'll survive in different places. You have the big fig and the little fig and things like that. You could do that. Just pick native plants of interest that are common. You know, if you wanted to go into exotics like orchids, you'd have to deal with special cultivation. The ferns would need a lot of moisture. But to me, it's odd that coming to a place like this, you'd need to go to a botanical garden when you have a botanical garden everywhere you go. You could, do more for education on trails. Point out that these, the reason I'm giving I like Fern talk is to spread the good word. Most people don't deal with ferns because they really don't understand what's going on. They have a unusual system of reproduction, which I'm not sure I thoroughly understand either. Two different phases, and the sori on the bottom. But once people see this, once people start to learn about things like this, then they become interested. So I don't know. Botanical gardens are not that. But I would put money into education, the plants you have, and protecting it and what have you. Yeah.
What did the cause eat? What did the cause eat on that?
And that's just the ones we observed around the house. They were feasting on what you call the July tree pods, and they were pecking away at the fruit of the African tulip tree, the pods.
When it's dry, or
When
it's
I
still
think when
green before it's
I'm not sure.
On the tulipans, I think they were eating the seeds. Because
when the seed pod opens and they're all just
because they would be pecking at the seed pods and the seeds would come spewing out. And with the flamboyant, we call the July tree, they would take the pods and crack them open and eat the seeds.
okay. But we have macaws.
Yeah, we do. Okay, they have to compete with the invasive parakeets we have too, who also like the African tulip tree. So somebody would let them go, or they just wandered here. The macaws. I know. Stacia had the people in one of the houses had macaws and something there. I actually like them. I mean, I don't object to everything that's invasive. The iguana are a bit of a pain in Puerto Rico. I don't think you want them here. Any other questions?
That was a good question, but does anything in general eat ferns? There's no deer here, or
I don't know. I honestly don't know. They're usually not attacked by insects. They're in a herbarium. They're usually one of the things that are immune to insects. I'm told insects can eat them, but I've never seen evidence of that. I've seen insects go after grasses of all things. But herbariums are funny. A good rule of thumb, someone told me, it's an interesting thing about insects and herbariums. He said that the plants outside that have the chemicals that protect them from insects are the first things to get eaten in a herbarium, because it's a different brand of insect. Like composites can be, and some of the Fabaceae, other thing, and Apiaceae, carrot family. Yeah. So, yeah, you have a question? No. Okay. I guess that's it then.
Thank you, Frank, for that very fascinating talk on ferns tonight. Another round of applause, guys. All right, we have a few more upcoming events for you. Tomorrow is his fern hike at 9 a.m., Sandy Cruz Trail. Meet us at the tent for a taxi. Then on Monday, we have a presentation at Lollipops with our oil and water expert, Jim Orris. Then again on Wednesday, we have another presentation at Scout's Place with our Galaxy expert, Sidney Lower. And then finally on Friday, we have our coral nursery expert, Dahlia Hassel, at Hideaway, 5:30 p.m. So lots of interesting presentations coming up. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Thank you so much. Thank you, Facebook, for joining with us. I'd like to thank all of our sponsors, particularly Long Haul, for sponsoring us. Thank you, guys. Please stay for dinner afterwards. And as always, thank you, Carib Trans. Everyone, have a good night.
Miami is known as an international community and the hub of trade and logistics for the Caribbean and Americas. A leader in the freight logistics industry, Carib Trans has served the Caribbean region for more than 30 years, with a footprint that has grown from one island to now serving the majority, as well as Central and South America. Carib Trans is an NVOCC, a non-vessel operating common carrier, meaning it has the same responsibilities as a shipper without owning the vessels or planes. Its primary customers, individuals who ship clothing, electronics, and other personal items, and occasionally cars.
Most of the stuff that they're sending is because they don't get it there. So for us to provide it on two services, air and ocean, we can give it a choice of how fast you want it. So if you want it really fast, we're going to send it by air, you're going to have it next day, sometimes even the same day.
That on-time service has been the key to Carib Trans' success, whether shipping by air or by sea. The company moves about 5,000 TEUs of freight each year, more than any NVOCC in the region. And since it joined the Saltchuk family of transportation companies a couple of years ago, Carib Trans can offer customers even more shipping options.
Other NVOCCs, they depend on other shipping lines that are not part of their family. So they need to rely on whether they're going to sell or not, whether they are late or not. It doesn't happen to us because it's part of our family of companies. We control the service that we give.
Sí, buenos días, por favor, con Diana.
Quality service is what keeps customers coming back. Customers are treated like family, and when they leave to research competitors, it doesn't usually last long.
They have left and they have come back because they've said that, nobody does it better than Carib Trans. So because of that relationship.
That exceptional service includes consolidation. Customers can have freight sent here and stored for free for up to a month, then consolidated and shipped on to the islands and Americas, a perk for the region's growing small business market. Puerto Rico is an expanding market for Carib Trans, about the size of Connecticut and rich in history and culture. Puerto Rico is home to many pharmaceutical manufacturers, as well as a thriving tourism industry for which Carib Trans moves raw materials and supplies. But serving small businesses is still the company's bread and butter here in San Juan. Businesses like Caldera Café, a local coffee company, Owner Alfredo Rodriguez started growing coffee beans at his mountain farm about 20 years ago. He recently ordered a variety of new equipment for his farm and shop. He uses CaribTrans because it consolidates shipments, which cuts down on the number of times he has to pay the Puerto Rico import tax.
Not many companies want to do that. They want only big cargoes and maybe half container or full containers, but they don't want to consolidate because it's more difficult.
Turning challenges into opportunities is what CaribTrans does, and that includes helping to grow small businesses like Caldera Café by taking the hassle out of shipping.
We can be a gateway to expand their business in the Caribbean and back to the U.S. Wherever they can sell their products, we are also going to be a partner for them.
That customer dedication has made CaribTrans what it is today. Now, as part of a larger family with more transportation resources, CaribTrans hopes to grow beyond its current market, offering services to additional Latin American ports and eventually Europe and Asia. But even when it becomes a global logistics company, CaribTrans wants to stay true to its roots, always providing personalized, reliable customer service and a commitment to the communities it serves.